All right, good morning, everybody. How's that for sound? Can you hear me? Great, excellent. Well, I was realizing this morning this is my first in-person talk since before COVID, so I'm hoping this is like getting right back on a bike. But it's lovely to be with you all again, and thanks for those lovely remarks, Chris, and thank you for all the work that you do. This group of working land managers inspire me in the work that I do and force me to think about the practical application of conservation and conservation policy to how we manage our landscapes. So I've been working in environmental science and conservation for my entire adult life, and I learned something new last year, and that was that I needed to start all of my talks, all of my presentations, all of my reports with hope. Hope is what we need to engage people in an idea and what we need to turn that engagement into actual action. And so the idea of active hope, thinking about practical ways that you can actually help to solve a problem, are really an essential ingredient in conservation and in getting things done. And luckily, oak conservation in the Willamette Valley anyway is a story of hope. The oak woodlands and savannas that are in our region are some of the most iconic and ecologically and culturally significant habitats that we have. They're also some of the most imperiled. So we knew over a decade ago that we had about 3 to 7% of native intact habitat left in this region. And that number is relative to pre-settlement distribution. So we had about 400,000 acres in the Willamette Valley pre-settlement. We're down to 3 to 7%. That was a decade ago. Luckily, these oak landscapes, for whatever reason, really resonate with us. People care deeply about them. And so the plight of oak, their sort of rapid loss, has actually galvanized a community of tribal partners, of conservation scientists, of landholders, of winemakers, of photographers, of artists, to come together around a shared vision for their stewardship. Where we are now, though, hope can be somewhat challenging to see or to feel or to believe in. Whether climate change is part of your daily lexicon or not, we are living with its predicted impacts and ecological effects. We have hotter summers. We have increased intensity and frequency of wildfire. We have more intense rain events, and more of our precipitation is falling as rain rather than snow, all of which leads to extended periods of drought. And we also, we also have to accept that that leads to an increased amount of uncertainty in how we manage our landscapes, whether that's a natural habitat or whether that's an agricultural landscape. And so the rapid loss of oak, this is a map that shows the difference between the 1850 distribution, so pre-settlement or pre-contact, and this is 2004. The yellow are grasslands, the brown are oak woodlands, and the green is riparian area. And if you look really hard, you can see the 2004 distribution. That's almost 20 years ago. And so you can imagine how little we have left. Most of that is due to conversion for urban areas and for rural and semi-rural areas and agricultural use. So we have lost a lot. For oak in particular, along with conversion, the lack of fire in our landscapes means that conifer trees and other tree species are encroaching in these oak woodland areas and outcompeting them. So we are losing oak that way. We also have an influx of invasive species, so things like English ivy and Scots broom and blackberry, which also sort of strangle oak habitat due to the way that they grow. And then we have a big issue around lack of recruitment for oaks. So we don't tend to have a lot of younger trees coming up in this landscape to replace the ones that we're losing. Along with those issues, oak in particular faces some particular challenges. One is that most of the remaining habitat is found on private land. So that means we really need private landowners engaged in oak restoration in order to make gains in improving the amount of habitat that we have. There are also, amongst the general populace, a relatively low level of awareness about oak conservation as an issue. When I first met with Pat and Mimi many years ago and we started talking about habitat butterfly, the idea of oak being a really significant conservation issue wasn't necessarily foremost in everybody's minds. And so the more folks that we talked to, the more we realized that this awareness issue was a big reason why we were sort of incrementally losing all these oaks. There are no actual protection programs or regulatory drivers or laws that protect this habitat. So you can cut down an oak, no problem. There's nothing to prevent us from doing that in Oregon. And then there are very few programs that are specifically targeted to oak, to its conservation or restoration, to funding it. There are more coming in recently, but that's a relatively new development. So all of those have meant that we have a lot of pressure on oak as a habitat type and very few sort of practical ways to restore it. Which kind of begs the question, why do we need to care about oak? Why do I care so much about oak? Why do so many of us care about this? First, it's a very important biological and functionally significant species. So it's one of our largest and longest living terrestrial species in North America. The trees themselves are called biodiversity islands, so they support a huge amount of flora and fauna. The Oregon white oak alone supports over 200 species in their sort of surrounding ecosystem and on the trees themselves. And so in Oregon white oak, there's actually a number of sensitive and threatened species that depend on oak. The chipping sparrow, the acorn woodpecker, the western great squirrel are all oak-dependent species, so really significantly important from a biodiversity perspective. And functionally, in riparian systems, they provide shade that are beneficial to aquatic species, and in prairie savanna systems, they provide shade that are really important to terrestrial species. Also, they happen to sequester and store carbon, which is an important functional feature. They are also incredibly symbolic of our relationship with the land. So they are first and foremost culturally significant to the indigenous people of this area. Historically, tribal people in this area, the Kalapuya and other tribes of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde and Siletz Indian, burned the landscapes to produce conditions that were beneficial for camas bulbs, which are an important first foods, and acorns were also a really important food source. And those large sort of savanna-like conditions that were created were really important for hunting. And acorns and camas bulbs are still really important first foods even today with tribal nations. People also have like this really deep affinity for oak. For whatever reason, folks connect to it at an emotional level and an aesthetic level. If you think about the websites for a lot of tasting rooms or vineyards, or if you look at tourism websites in the Willamette Valley, I guarantee you most of them will feature some silhouetted oak with the sun coming through the background, or just a beautiful vista of a hillside with Oregon white oak. Definitely a swing from a lower branch of an oak is a photo that you see a lot. So I used to joke that one way to get people's attention would be to go through all these websites and scrub out the oaks and see what was kind of left. Like what would we have in this landscape if we didn't have oaks? So we just have this real emotional and deep affinity for them. And in a way, our relationship to oak conservation is sort of symbolic for this time. So we know, we've seen the map, we know what the threats are, we know how to address them. And the decision to do something about this, about oak restoration, is sort of a question for the time. We know what to do, will we act? And if we don't, what does that mean for us? And so kind of what we decide to do now is definitely going to have cultural and economic and ecological, and to Chris's point, maybe even moral consequences for us. And that brings me to the title of my talk, which was about resilience and resistance in conservation in oak. So resilience is defined as successfully coping with and managing the impacts of change while preventing those impacts from growing worse. So you think about resilience as your ability to kind of bounce back from a big impact. Resistance is the capacity, in this case of an ecological system, to weather a disturbance without loss of integrity or function. And it turns out that both resilience and resistance are really important ingredients of ecosystem stability. Oaks are one of the few habitat types that actually exhibit both of those characteristics. So oaks are extremely sort of climate adaptive. They are drought tolerant, they have very deep taproots, they do well in full sun, and so they are able to weather hotter, drier conditions. Their sort of furrowed, leathery bark and the really thick, leathery leaves make them very fire resistant. So they are able to withstand wildfire that can come through a stand, which also makes them a great fire break. So a well-managed oak woodland is actually a really great set of protection in, say, a semi-urban or semi-rural area where you might have wildfire coming through. And one of the things that struck me as I was putting together this talk is that resilience and resistance, they're really important ecological concepts, but they're also relative to our kind of human response to systems. So take a pandemic or take climate change, for example. Our ability to be resilient in the face of these systems is really important. But right now with climate change, our ability to be resistant, to kind of adapt without losing function or integrity is also really important. And so this brings me to the Oak Accord, which is a program that started in 2017 with many people in this room. It was sort of a landowner vineyard response to the plight of the oak. Folks started to talk about oak conservation, realized that we needed to do something about it. And this voluntary agreement that was signed in 2017 was the commitment to, we want to actually protect this oak ecosystem and restore it as much as possible. And I think part of the gravitation towards this idea of voluntarily committing to protecting oak on working lands was seeing a very straightforward solution to a problem. We are losing oak, we know how to restore oak, great, let's do something about it. And in a way, people were just sort of looking for an answer or some direction about what they needed to do. It was also really important for people to feel like they were part of something. Sometimes, you know, when you look at that map of loss of oak, you think, well, that is an impossible problem to solve, or that is an impossible amount of progress to try and make. But when you're with a group of people who are all doing something about it, that can be a powerful experience. So one of the quotes that really helps me in conservation work is, you know, no one made a greater mistake than the person who did nothing because they could only do a little. And that idea of all of us doing a little and coming together and it turning into a big thing, I think was a really important factor in why the Oak Accord became a thing. So one of the goals of the Oak Accord is to restore enough connected, resilient oak habitat in the Willamette Valley so that it is functional, primarily for species. This map shows the difference in oak habitat between 1938 to 2007 to 2013. And we're sort of using that 2007 distribution as our goal for a net 10% of oak habitat under conservation management relative to pre-settlement time. So we started off with 400,000 acres. The goal is to get 40,000 acres back under conservation management. And having that target, having that number is quite important for folks. I often would get phone calls from people saying, where are we at now? How much more do we need? And knowing that you have 1 acre, 10 acres, 80 acres that you can contribute to that goal is really powerful. It was also really important to be able to talk about the distribution of opportunity for oak restoration on private lands and connect them to a lot of the anchor sites that exist in the Willamette Valley that are under permanent protection. So this shows a distribution of some of the original signatories for the Oak Accord, where they're located, and groups who work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or Department of Fish and Wildlife can look at that map and say, I see opportunities for expanding our network of permanently protected land for oak. And so we're talking about building these zones of biodiversity that Oak Accord signatories are an important part of. And then wanting to make sure that we are connecting this to sort of the functionality of habitats. So looking at species needs, specifically birds, which are oak dependent. and thinking about what kind of density we need and where we need it as a way to help guide and prioritize where we want to do oak conservation projects. And really importantly, and actually the whole genesis behind the Oak Accord was around education and awareness. And so the time when we were forming this program, there was a huge influx of new landowners to the Willamette Valley. And this idea of there being this agreement that landowners had signed on to commit oak was also about raising that awareness with new landowners. People will come in, ideally you would have a real estate agent or developer talk about the Oak Accord and hand folks a pamphlet to say, oak is a really important conservation value in this region. You should find out about it. And before you develop your vineyard, you could learn about the importance of oak and think about decisions you might make proactively to protect the oak that was on your landscape. My sort of little saying is that an ounce of protection is worth a pound of restoration. It takes a long time to restore oak. It's fairly expensive. It's not very easy. It's much easier to protect what's there than to bring it back. So having sort of small handouts in tasting rooms and pamphlets for developers is just a way to get in front of different audiences and raise that awareness, which was another big goal of the Oak Accord. So a little bit about oak restoration and thinking about resilience and thinking about resistance, maintaining ecosystem integrity. Oak conservation issues can be divided into really two camps. One is around oak woodlands that, when they need to be restored, tend to be kind of overgrown. So this image shows invasives in the overstory. You've got mostly English ivy that can very easily, once it gets started, climb up a tree, get into the overstory, and choke out oaks. You also have competition or crowding that can come from conifers that start to encroach in a shady understory, as well as other shrubs and other small oaks that can actually compete and crowd out the larger oaks, which have those really high biodiversity values. And then understory invasives, and I've named a few of those, Himalayan blackberry and Scots broom. If anyone is out there managing those, you know how tenacious they are and how difficult they are to kind of get a hold of. And so restoring an oak stand is really about sort of building up the resistance of these habitat types. So doing a thinning, going out and cutting down some of the smaller oak trees or some of the smaller conifers and hauling those out, and creating space for those existing oak trees to become those biodiversity islands. When larger oaks are given space, they can branch laterally and they can start to develop more and more of those features that make them such high value biodiversity contributors. So the clearing and the thinning is probably the most important thing that can be done for crowded woodlands, and we call that an oak release or an oak thinning. And so that's kind of the primary work that goes on with oak restorations in terms of woodlands. And this is a great image of a before and after a thinning. You can see the difference there. And those remaining oak are going to go on to actually become more prolific in terms of the biodiversity values that they are creating. The other big issue is the lack of oak savanna. So savanna is probably one of the rarest habitat types that we have in the Willamette Valley. We have very, very little. And because we don't have a lot of that regular burning, which was what creates those open conditions, we actually need to actively go in and create oak savanna. So that's really about planting acorns or planting saplings. And whenever we see opportunities to do that on a fallow field, we really try and encourage landowners to take on that work. Not the easiest thing in the world to get a savanna established if anyone's tended an oak. They are very slow growing. They need quite a bit of nurturing in their first couple of years. They're susceptible to browse, but I mean, from an acorn grows truly a mighty and beautiful tree that, as we've talked about, can contribute huge amounts of biodiversity. So establishing an oak savanna is another really important component of oak restoration. And the Oak Accord has sort of standards and guidelines around how landowners can do that, either on their own or with contracted professional help. And this is an image down where I live in Corvallis of a beautifully restored oak savanna. You can see the open space underneath. Ideally, there'd be a few more native bunch grasses or native species in the understory, but they were going to plant that in the following year. So in terms of the process for the Oak Accord, as I said, it's a voluntary program. People come in, they sign an agreement committing themselves to restoring or protecting oak on their property. We've been doing what we call baseline assessments, which is basically just going out and mapping where oak is on the property, where there are opportunities for restoration, like creating an oak savanna. And then we recommend that landowners take on a suite of oak restoration projects. And ideally, we would come back in 5 years and take a look at what's happened and start to map out where we're seeing some of those habitat gains, again, with that goal of creating a resilient and connected network of oak habitat. There's quite a bit of technical support out there. There is not a ton of financial support out there for oak restoration. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has a Partners in Conservation program. Oregon State University Extension program offers a lot of technical advice and support. And the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board has grants and technical support. Our soil and water conservation districts are a huge wealth of information around oak conservation. And so working with your local conservationist, they have individuals that can come out to your property and help advise you on what to do and when to do it. And then there are sort of guidelines or technical resources out there online to help landowners think about how to design their own oak release, either in sort of a working landscape or, as is becoming more popular, in urban and semi-urban areas. So there's sort of a plethora of information out there that can support a very sort of enthusiastic and dedicated group of people to doing oak restoration on their own landscape. There are a number of challenges, and I found this photo of things that keep me up at night, and it's pretty appropriate. The first is that, so as someone who came in and said, landowners, come together, we need to restore oak, it's been very challenging for me working in conservation and for other of my colleagues working in conservation to bring the resources that you all need to do this well. It's not necessarily straightforward. You can't walk into your oak woodland or your oak savanna and sort of intuitively know what to do. You need some support to know which trees to cut. You need to know what contractors to hire, when to do the work, how much it's going to cost, how to replant the understory. So finding that technical support in a way that is streamlined and works well with a working landowner has been pretty challenging. There are not really any incentives for folks to do this. What I really appreciated when we started the Oak Accord, we talked about a label or some kind of like award or certificate, and everyone said, no thank you. We just want to do this because it's the right thing to do. But having some kind of incentive does help folks, especially for folks who are, maybe they have other considerations other than just the right thing to do in terms of a conservation plan for their property. So having some kind of incentive, ideally a financial incentive, some kind of tax break, those are really important to bring people to the table and encourage them to get into the oak conservation game. There just aren't a lot of them out there. And then oak is just not a highly valued species. So we do have this aesthetic connection to it, and we could argue that having intact, beautiful native landscapes is an investment in our region. It certainly attracts people to the Willamette Valley. But when folks are cutting down oak or doing a thinning, there isn't a lot of economic return that you can get from that material. And we just don't put a really sort of high price, either financially or morally, on oak in our region. And so these are a lot of the issues that myself and a lot of my colleagues in the conservation profession are trying to work to address. How do we make it easier? How do we bring more dollars to oak conservation work in Oregon to support landowners doing this on their property? Okay, so I'm gonna go now back to hope. This is just a sample of some of the signatories of the Oak Accord. We have so many people who want to do the right thing, who want to get involved in oak conservation. I get calls every week of people wanting to know what to do. Can someone sign if they only have one oak tree on their property? Yes, every single oak counts. The idea that this many people, and along with many, many others, are this committed and enthusiastic about oak conservation, to me is incredibly hopeful. This is active hope. This is turning engagement around an idea into action. I love that. You actually have businesses who are committing to supporting this effort financially. So Sustainable Northwest Wood, based out of Portland, Oregon, that kind of collects and helps to process wood that comes from sustainably managed forests, donate 10% of their sales of oak to the Oak Accord that go directly to on-the-ground restoration projects. So it's not very much money, but it is their, that is putting your money where your mouth is. They are contributing dollars to this program to directly help landowners do this work. Still, we are still losing oak at an alarming rate. If this is the 2004 map, I'm guessing the 2023 map would mostly be gray. And so we're realizing that while oak conservation, oak restoration projects are very important, we need to support them, encourage them, plan them, do as much as we can wherever we can. We also need more awareness about this issue. We need more money in the system. We need more policies, whether those are tax incentives, some kind of financial incentive for landowners who are conserving oak on their property. We need more of that. And so where I am starting to turn more of my attention is around kind of awareness. Awareness at the policy level in Oregon and at the sort of general public awareness level, and also at the foundation level where a lot of the money or funds can come from to support on-the-ground oak restoration. So along with a number of groups throughout North America, well actually in the Pacific North America right now, we are launching a campaign that we're calling the Year of the Oak. So 2025 will be the Year of the Oak. This is actually the first kind of public announcement about it. And we're talking about planting the next generation of Oregon white oaks. So we're excited to get school kids out there planting little acorns and learning about oak conservation and oak habitats while we are kind of cultivating the next generation of oak stewards. So a group of people who live in this region who know about oak and who care about it. You see, I live next to a lot of oak savanna. One of my favorite sites is little kids climbing on the lower boughs of trees and kind of jumping around and really literally interacting with these beautiful, gorgeous oaks. And the idea of kind of connecting that to the education of our children, getting them outside, getting them planting a tree, back to Chris's kind of opening paragraph that he read, to me that seems like a symbolic and sort of exciting and hopeful way to think about oak conservation in the Willamette. So ideally turning a story which could be seen as sort of hopeless into something that is kind of full of enthusiasm and very hopeful. So keep your eye out for more information about that. We would love anyone in this room to be part of that campaign. It's really about just promoting the idea of oak conservation and the value of oak and the importance of it in our everyday life.